Gamecock fans, now you can have your coffee and also support the Gamecocks in a championship quest to get to the top of the SEC and the top of the country by going to GamecockCoffee.com and purchasing Rise and Shine New Orleans Roast Gourmet Coffee. All of your purchases go to benefit Garnet Trust and put NIL dollars in the coffer of the Gamecocks official NIL collective. Check it out today and support the Gamecocks NIL. Good morning, friends, Gamecock fans out there. Welcome into Coffee. Today is Thursday, March 13th, the year of our Lord, 2025. Almost midway through March, man. That's time's flying. It tends to do that before you know it. We'll be in Atlanta. Football season will be here. But a long way to go before that. Lots of interesting happenings, including baseball, recruiting, March Madness for the women's basketball team. But one thing that's over is the men's basketball season. Some would say mercifully so. I tend to agree with that. I think anytime you go through sort of an unprecedented season like this where the record would indicate that you're just getting the doors blown off of you, but you've had so many games against really good teams that were within the grasp, and you just couldn't find a way to get it done. Just weren't good enough, quite frankly, to get it done. At key moments this season, the Gamecocks finished 12-20, one game better than Lamont Paris's first team finished, which was 11-21. Gamecocks were dead last in the SEC, as they were predicted to be last year. So there you go with that. Yesterday, we were on the show when it was starting. It was a close game. Mike Morgan does the drive around the SEC, and we kind of quit talking about what we're watching with the game, kind of live. It's like a Mystery Science Theater 3000 type of deal, watching the basketball game in the second half of the show. We come back from that, and Arkansas is up 17. Then Arkansas gets up 20. And then the Gamecocks make a valiant comeback. Now, I'll admit, guys and gals, I believe this team has not quit. I think, especially at home this year, they haven't quit. I thought they were really competitive at Tennessee, that kind of thing. I did not see a rally against Arkansas like that coming. Because a lot of times, regardless of a team's fighting spirit during the season and all, it's a long season. It's win or go home, and the scoreboard says you're going home. And by God, if the Gamecocks didn't say, hey, we don't really want to go home just yet, and rallied and, squeezed every ounce of competitive basketball out of the rest of the season. But then, unfortunately, as has happened so many times this year, they couldn't get it done in crunch time. I mean, you get boxed out like you do. Jordan Butler is in there at the end. I'm not trying to be critical individually of him, because I thought he got better, in a lot of ways. He's got to get stronger and play tougher down. If he's going to play at this level, I don't think anybody's asking him to be a bully in there. You just got to be competitive, man. And it was not competitive. Break the layup, I think, later. Jamari Thomas jacks up a three, and Arkansas salting it away. Gamecocks still didn't quit. They still kept coming. Ended up losing 72-68. So the dream of going to 4-0 against Calipari and winning 4 straight against Arkansas unfortunately died in Nashville yesterday, but everybody can appreciate the effort. I think most Gamecock fans do. There's some folks out there that, and I think that under normal times, when you have a season like this, as far as the record goes, it calls into question in how we just recently completed era of SEC athletics. I think you could say, it's 50-50 if there's a coaching change. And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. My guess is, even in the old era, given the number of close losses, given that they want to try to put resources into it, but in the old era, you wouldn't have NIL. You'd just be like, well, what are you going to do? And there isn't this great recruiting class on paper coming in. There's some good players in the class, don't get me wrong. But, sometimes you'll have a record like this, but you got a top 10 class full of with a couple of McDonald's All-Americans, and you're like, okay, well, forget that. We'll get them next year. So what I'm saying with that is I don't agree with the folks that are like fire, 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 fire. I don't think that's ever, even in the old way where it probably would be in question. I don't think it's always the solution people think. Sometimes, you don't really. I think fans and even myself, we live in the moment, which is a good thing. That's what they tell you to do in life. But we don't necessarily think about what was going on at the time. I mean, I hear a lot of complaints about, I'll give you an example. Chad Holbrook in baseball. Okay, takes over for Tanner. Goes to a super, goes to a regional the next year as a high seed. And that's kind of when the first leak sprung. They lost to Maryland and got eliminated. The next year, they did not make the tournament for the first time since '99. So that's kind of a red flag, don't you think? So the next year's big because the baseball program had big standards. Well, he turns around and goes to a super regional. Lost in the supers to Oklahoma State, and went to another super regional. That's two super regionals and a regional 3 out of 4 years. Every program, LSU on down, has that 1 year where they don't make it. So then he comes back the next year, again misses the tournament, and Ray Tanner fired him. So there's a lot of criticism. Held on to Holbrook too long. Well, no, not really, because you're not going to fire a guy after the first, you know, not so good team, in the history of the last 2 decades of college baseball. And then he went to the Supers the next year. So you're not going to fire a guy then. And then the next year, it was time, I don't, we can argue about whether he replaced him with a good coach or not, but that's not an argument that Chad, that situation should have, they should have fired Chad Holbrook with Frank Martin. We all know, and I didn't even agree with the administration on this. If it hadn't been for COVID, he may have been gone much sooner. I didn't agree with that at all. And he's winning, and he kind of just they were kind of stuck in purgatory a little bit, the basketball team. And folks, for those of you that wanted Frank Martin gone, I said at the time, well, there's one of two ways this thing's going to go, but you're not going to get the consistency. And look, man, sometimes it's just time. I mean, I didn't, by the time they let him go, I was kind of ambivalent about it. I could make a case either way. And, they replaced him with Lamont Paris. And it's been kind of how I warned it. It's been up and down, up and down, up, down, up, down. And, Lamont's first year, that you get a pass for that, man. That was a tough situation. And then last year, really, really good record-setting season, coach of the year. This year, the league caught up to him, caught up to the Gamecocks big time, and they were probably a player or two away. The record doesn't show that, but if you look at the results of games, it definitely does. Just weren't good enough. And so, I don't think the only coaches in basketball I think they've held on to too long are Dave Odom and Darren Horn. And that cost them. And that wasn't Ray Tanner, for those that want to just blame him. Will Muschamp, there's no way you'll convince me that he should have been gone earlier. You go back, and again, it's looking at what happened at the time. At the time, I could have made a case for it. 4-8, your fourth year. You have a lot of good players. Lost to App at home. Again, we're not competitive with Clemson. Did lose your quarterback. But honestly, and nobody saw this coming with COVID and all the stuff that happened in the summer of 2020. And then all the good players that he brought in with the class of 2020 that would have gone elsewhere when you had a coaching change. And that kind of left enough. I mean, a lot of those guys stuck, and Beamer benefited from it. And Muschamp did a really good job of keeping the team together and keeping the opt-outs pretty low and things like that. And yeah, the record was the record, and he ended up getting fired. But looking back on it in hindsight, at the time, you kind of pretty happy that Carolina had some stability because, they weren't very good to begin with. And you start taking all the good players off the roster, it's going to be a hole that, you don't know. Because then at that point, Beamer's totally relying on the portal to begin with. There's nothing, there's no Tonka Hemingway left and guys like that helped them, at the beginning. No DeCarrion Joyner probably to save the bowl game. I mean, you're having a mass exodus if you make that call then. And then you have a new coach, no matter how good they are, coming in and trying to navigate new players that they don't know through all that stuff that happened in the summer of 2020 and COVID. I I I think sometimes the record of 2020 was a blessing in disguise because you did stick with the previous staff. They did not win. You probably aren't winning any more than two. Maybe you don't win any that year because it's just a mess. And then you move forward, and some of that foundation that was built was used to keep the program afloat and get to the point they got to last year. So I don't know that sometimes when fans and even folks like me think it's time for a change, that it necessarily is. Mark Kingston, I could have made a pretty good argument in, when was it? Was it 2020? After 2022, I could have made a pretty strong argument. Whatever that year was where they lost, they again were not in the tournament. It was right before they turned it around, and they got to the super regionals. Okay, no, I know what it was. 2021. They lost to Old Dominion at home in the region. That was a blown opportunity. And then 2022, yeah, did not go well. And I think they lost a record number of games because 2020 was canceled. So in the SEC. And then they went to the Supers in 2023. So I could have made a case there. So I'll go there. My point of that, all that is, right now, too, you got a $20 million hole. And I don't want to hear about the buyout. I mean, I hear this a lot, and it's not you guys necessarily as a whole. I think most of you understand. Some don't. The Lamont Paris's buyout is super duper standard, and if anything's pretty favorable to South Carolina. And you have to look around, and a lot of times I say it's kind of funny because some folks, they will look and obsess over what everybody else is doing, other schools. And it's almost a jealousy, and they almost kind of put down what happens here based on what happens there, But when it comes to things like buyouts, the expectation is South Carolina is going to be super savvy and not pay and basically be cheapskates, and then some folks start picking up business. I own a business, or in business, you don't do this. This is a different business, folks. I own a business too. College athletics is completely different. You're trying to win athletic games and athletic events. Lamont Paris had an offer to go coach Ohio State in his home state last year. They were going to pay him money. If anything, South Carolina got a pretty good deal out of it. And again, at the time, you're going to just let the SEC coach of the year, that he's the only coach to ever lead you to the NCAA tournament by his second season ever, including McGuire. Name your coach that's come through here. Only coach to ever lead you to the tournament in his second year and set a school record, or tied a school record for wins with 26, tied the Final Four team, and you're just going to let him walk. And a lot of folks, their logic behind this is what he did at Chattanooga, because he didn't have this dominant record at Chattanooga. And I'll remind everybody, he coached Chattanooga again through a pandemic and all the changes and everything else. I didn't think the record was great either at Chattanooga. I would have probably preferred a better record, just to be honest, and I said it at the time. And that was one of the not so great things. So to me, settle down. It's not happening, first and foremost. Secondly, if things don't work out with Lamont and he gets fired, I'm going to tell you right now, you're not right. You're not going to be right. I should have fired him. No, you're not going to be right because that's not the right time to make a call on the firing. And yes, the buyout and it's not just the buyout. It's the money that South Carolina as an institution and everybody else has to come up with for rev share. You don't just have 20 million sitting in the bank if you're an athletics department. Athletics departments are nonprofits. They spend every penny almost that they bring in, right? They have some reserves for sure, but it's not like you can go, okay, well, you got to get buy out the basketball coach, hire a new coach, which is going to cost you top dollar to get anybody good to come coach this place in men's basketball. Good, known, proven. It's just not. It's not a very good job. Period. Does it have potential? Yes, but when you're talking about, I talked about team job program. Job is at the bottom of the SEC. It doesn't have to be. It probably shouldn't be, but it is. That's just the way it's perceived. It's not my call. It's not my opinion. Talk to basketball people about it. The football job used to kind of have some maybe unfair opinions about it as well, but and probably still does. But because football people, sometimes when you're talking job with football, the reality goes out the door. It's just like, well, you got the same old stuff you hear. But South Carolina, the job's just it's tough to fill. So you're going to have to pay money for that, and then come up with money for rev share, and then probably overpay coming up in the Wild West period for the portal. So I just don't. I mean, South Carolina's not the only school that just straight up doesn't have it, right? I mean, it's interesting this time period that we're in. So my point to say all that is, hey, look, it's a bad season. I know you're frustrated. I understand, folks that, maybe they don't understand rev share. They're just mad, or they just have never liked the hire. That they won't change, and coaching changes are fun, and sports is entertainment. I get it. Totally get it, man. I mean, that's, I like me a good coaching change myself, but, it's not happening, and it's not productive to continue to get on Twitter and call for it. In my opinion. So, it's fine. This is America. I'm not trying to shut down any speech. I'm just kind of telling you kind of how I feel about it. The softball team lost to Coastal last night, 5-3. Don't really know much to say about that other than they were saying Coastal was good coming in. I got caught up with something and didn't have a chance to watch it last night. I did catch some of the baseball game. Gamecocks win 7-1, so they're 15-3 heading into these next 11 games. JB was talking yesterday. He was like, "Let's just go 5-6." I'm like, baseball's probably the only sport where you sit there and go, if we could just go 5-6 in the next 11, we'll be doing all right. Hey, I agree with it. I mean, it starts with Oklahoma this weekend, and I thought the guys yesterday, from what I saw, and that was kind of going on when I was busy, but I watched a few innings. Yeah, they tend to hit the ball hard. This team, sometimes, it'll come off the bat pretty good and just die in the outfield. I guess, I'm probably saying something stupid there. That's probably just baseball. So anyway, that's kind of the roundup and putting a bow on yesterday here on coffee. Want to remind you about GamecockCoffee.com. You heard about that at the front. If you are listening on YouTube, GamecockCoffee.com to go support NIL. Download the app for March Madness Underdog Dynasty, or Underdog Fantasy, Underdog Dynasty. I think it's Underdog Dynasty. Underdog Fantasy, Underdog Dynasty, I think, is a blog. I apologize. Anyway, it's 1801 Media / Garnet Trust. It's a kind of cool thing. Now, I downloaded it yesterday or 2 days ago. I put in $5. It's a game, basically, kind of over under individual players. So it's like daily fantasy football. And I won some money, but now I'm not in the state of South Carolina, and that's all governed by the rules of your state and stuff. But if you just simply download the app, put in $5, that's a significant amount of money that goes into 1801 Media / Garnet Trust. Now, for them to get the money, for us to get the money, because I work with them, put in the code 1801 when you sign up. That's 1801, like the year, the founding year of the University of South Carolina. And they get credit. So it's really simple. So that's another way to kind of get some NIL dollars in the coffer for Garnet Trust, for basketball, for what we just talked about, the basketball program. Football has another transfer portal period. Like I said, dollars going to be kind of scarce here, NIL wise, or not scarce, but needed. How about that? I don't want to say scarce because that makes it sound like, rocking and rolling out there with $10 in your pocket trying to buy a Rolls Royce, right? But there's a need right now in the immediate, especially, and there's always going to be a need, but it's a big need right now because you still have a lot going on financially with other schools and the Gamecocks and whoever else. We're trying to compete, trying to keep it going between now and July 1st with the House settlement. One more basketball thing. Just want to say, shout out Colin Murray Boyles. Great player. Left it all on the court yesterday, obviously. If he goes to the NBA, great. Good for him, because that probably means he's going to be a pretty high draft pick. If not, and he comes back, man, he could be in the conversation for best player in the SEC next year. Anyway, really nice game from Colin Murray Bulls. But I know we always talk football here, and we are. So, and I want to say this. I always kind of in theory feel like what I need to do when I interact with Gamecock fans, whether it's here, other shows, the message board on thebigspur.com, is to explain how in football they're going to get there, right? It's not a sunshine and rainbows thing. It's laying out the scenarios as far as if this happens, or this needs to happen in order for this. And I think I do a pretty good job of that. Sometimes it's because we dive in, we get deep into the positions and the players and the recruits and all that. And, there's certain aspects of their games you talk about, and you're not going to throw a kid under the bus that's a true freshman when he comes in and maybe he doesn't lift as much or he's not as fast, and you're not going to predict doom and gloom, because that'll get you in trouble too, because if you come out and say that, then you're going to have a lot of crap out there on social media, and it's probably not going to end up being true. You could be in trouble for that. If you start young players, if you just start trashing them before they've even had a chance. So, it kind of trends towards here's what they're doing well, or like, hey, they got a little ways to go development wise, down the road. And that's the truth with football. When you're talking about individuals, when you're talking about the team, with as many holes as Carolina has to fill, I feel like I should tell you how they could possibly fill them, and be okay. Right. But what I'm going to talk about today is, because last year was a really good year that in the regular season, at least, ended with a bang, right? The bowl game's the bowl game. But the regular season, man, starting with that game at Oklahoma, Carolina took on all comers. They survived trap games with Vandy, and I think Missouri was probably a trap to a certain extent, although Missouri was 10-3 last year. They won the game at Clemson in a big hyped rivalry game. They beat Clemson for the second year in a row up there. Clemson was a playoff team. Beat A&M pretty good score-wise. Blew it open at the end. Blew out Oklahoma in one of the cathedrals of college football. I mentioned surviving Vandy. I mean, that was a great finish, right? And then got in the college football playoff conversation, and a case could have been made, and many did. Not just here on Chief Sports South Carolina with our shows. Some Clemson fan made a comment about that or some fan of some other school on the podcast thing. The only people that think Carolina should be in the playoff are y'all three, talking about me and Mike and Jamie. That's not true. Saw many people make a case for the Gamecocks. So it's great to be mentioned. Shane Beamer, SEC Coach of the Year, all that. Lenore Sellers, Rising Star. All that was positive. But was the team perfect? No. So what we're going to talk about today is team wise, overall, what does the team need to be better at next year to keep this train on the tracks and get it going? Because there's always room for improvement, and there definitely was. Carolina was 9-4 last year. Some of those losses were tough. I mean, Bama, LSU, and Illinois came right down to the end. And then there was a big WTF game with Ole Miss, but I'm finding these days most teams have that WTF game. Doesn't matter who they are. Even Ohio State had a couple of them this year, or one of them. Yeah, I'll give them the Oregon loss out there by a point, but that Michigan game, what are you doing? So everybody does, but there are certain things that you look at when you kind of examine the team and kind of the way things went in games, and you have to get better at those. Those are things the team needs to work on. We talk individuals all we want, but the team needs to get better here. And you're kind of looking for improvement. Number one is turnovers. Turnovers, particularly by Lenore Sellers, at times were devastating, or they could have been devastating. The Clemson game was one where if they would have lost that game, you look back at that early fumble, man, the interceptions, it could have been one where that aspect of his game was way, 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 way more emphasized than maybe it is. And he knows he needs to get better at that. And I think he will. Most quarterbacks do. Cut down on the fumbles, cut down on the turnovers. They came at bad times. Rocket Sanders had a couple of fumbles this year, right? So it's just one of those things where you're not always going to force a bunch on defense, though the Gamecocks do try. So if your offense is turning over and maybe it's just not bouncing your way defensively, you're going to lose games because of it. So that's number one for me. Cut back on the turnovers, see what happens. Number two, I think red zone. And the bowl game was really egregious with this because they certainly had their chances. A lot of times teams that aren't getting a big push up front struggle in the red zone. And it's because they can't, the field shrinks with regards to passing and spreading you out to run. I mean, it's really mono and mono once it gets tight down there. And they don't get enough of a push. They can't run it well enough and consistent enough with their backs or whoever to punch it in. And then the passing windows tighten. Now, there were sometimes Gamecocks were good down there, or sometimes they weren't. Sometimes Dowell Loggins would dial up a pretty good play, like the throwback pass to Simon against A&M, quarterback keepers, things like that. But when you think about the games that, like Ole Miss, where they drove it between the 20s just fine. Illinois, they had their chances and came away empty. Drop passes. They have to get better at that, because you waste all this time and energy going up and down the field trying to score, and then you come away and you don't score. That's frustrating, and preferably, as Spurrier used to say, touchdowns are preferable to field goals. That brings me to my next thing. They got to get better at the kicking game. Now, I defended Alex Herrera last year because I thought he was decent. I know that whenever you lose close games, every play is magnified. Missed kicks are magnified, certainly. Missed one in the bowl. But, what I didn't realize maybe when I was staunchly defending him at the beginning was around college football, it is a glory era of kickers. Like, in the NFL, it used to be, well, this guy's got a 50-yarder. He's probably going to hit it. In the college, it's a 50-plus yarder. You're like, oh, that's a 50-50 proposition or less. Now, from 50 and in is pretty routine. So that is something that you can look around at your competition and go, we need that here. I don't know who the kicker is going to be. I assume they may take a gander in the portal. Max Kelly is coming in as a true freshman. You have Mason Love that can handle all the duties. Joyce from Spartanburg High School was the competition walk-on guy for Alex Herrera last year. I think he's got another year. He's on the roster. So kickers are mostly walk-ons and things like that. So you're like, well, I don't know. So I don't know who's going to kick. I just know that It's going to not be if the rest of the kicking community at large ends up being really good. It's a disadvantage to not have a guy these days that can kick it from 50 in. Maybe that changes. And I've intentionally avoided this subject. For the website, I kind of let John Whittle handle the kickers. He's kind of our special teams coordinator. I don't follow it a whole lot. I was excited about Kai Kroger when he was a recruit because Kai was a left-footed kicker, and I thought that was really cool. And didn't know he could throw the ball like he could. And I think Mason Love is probably the heir apparent there to Kai. And look, Joe D. Camillus and Shane Beamer, those guys are special teams gurus. They probably, it's probably not even worth worrying about because they probably have a plan. And Alex Herrera, man, I mean, look, I look at it like, well, I changed my mind a little bit when I saw everybody else had guys that could kick for 50. So, ergo, the Gamecocks probably need to do that. But I thought he took a lot of crap. I thought he's pretty consistent within his range. However, could it be better? Absolutely. Do they need to get better than that as a team? Yes, because you're going to have games where in the SEC, maybe it's a defensive struggle. And those 3 points are going to matter. I mean, think about had Alex Herrera missed the kick at Clemson, and then Lenoris gets him in the end zone, they tie it, and then you saw what happened. And Kay Klubnik's not throwing to try to get a touchdown and win the game. They're kind of milk and clock to set it up for their very good kicker to win the game. So Alex did come through in some important moments. A, B, that shows you how important it is if you miss field goals. And that's not even talking about potentially tying it, the LSU game, sending it to overtime. That game, if Carolina had tied it up on that kick and sent it to overtime and maybe won, that would have been one of the all-time great games of the year in college football. I think people kind of forget about it because LSU, they both were like 9-4. But that was a hell of a football game. Anyway, and then at Alabama, he did miss a 50-something yarder. I mean, that could have beaten Alabama if that happened. Yeah, I don't know, man. Turnovers, things like that. I mean, however, yeah, if you'd had like a big-time guy that could nail it, a healthy Mitch Trubisky, or not Mitch Trubisky, sorry, Mitch Jeter, if you will. I say Mitch Trubisky. Mitch Jeter, if you will, who was up and down at Notre Dame. Maybe you do win it. But Carolina's got to get back to that. So the fourth thing is this, and it's kind of one of those things where it's a concern, but not, if that makes sense. A concern that didn't really cost them that much. And those are lapses in football games. And you look at kind of how the season played out. There were times in games where Carolina, I don't want to say let their foot off the gas, but the other team, the other team started playing well and they came back. Now, is that a function of just being in the SEC and playing really good football teams that inevitably are going to respond? I don't know, but it was concerning. It was concerning. I look back and you look at LSU. Like I said, the Gamecocks were rolling. They were up pretty good early. And then a long stretch of the game, LSU came all the way back, took the lead. Well, then the Gamecocks did respond, which they usually did. You look at that game. You look at Alabama. Carolina has all the momentum after, and that was kind of a back and forth. Carolina's up 14-0. They rally. They're up 19-14 with the ball. There's a fumble. Alabama comes back and rally. Carolina comes back. So that was maybe back and forth at Alabama. I'm not sure that that's applicable there. But in some of the wins, you look at Texas A&M, Gamecocks got up early 17-6. And next thing you know, you're sitting there at A&M's up 20-17 right before half. And Gamecocks did kick a field goal and tie it and then ran away in the second half and shut them out. That's the second quarter last. I mean, that can be costly. If you're on the road, it can be really costly. Carolina was at home and it didn't hurt them. Missouri, another home game, 21-6 at half, and you need a 1-minute drive to go down and win, because Missouri has come back. that kind of thing. In certain games last year, there were just these periods where, Carolina would get outplayed. I'm not saying you can go into a season and say, well, that's never going to happen. Not with the teams Carolina plays. It's probably unrealistic. But it was kind of a trademark of this team at times that they would get up and then the other team would respond. Um, I hate to even quote the college football playoff committee, but maybe that's what they mean by game control. I don't know if that's something they're basing the college football playoff on. They again, but yeah. So just make sure that there's kind of an even and consistent performance and all that. As long as you respond and you win at the end of the game, I don't think it's really critical. But there were some blown leads. There were some times where teams came back and cut into an early advantage for Carolina. I mean, even Oklahoma, the momentum stalls the second half. Oklahoma didn't have the offense to ever come back, but that second half, it was 32-3 at halftime, 35-9 was the final. So I think, just continuing to kick people's butt for 60 minutes is something that needs to improve. And then on defense, you can't complain much about the defense last season, but big plays, and that's a trademark of this defense. It's at times risky, but it's fun and it works. And so you got to run something. And I think many of you would rather Clayton White gamble sometimes and get beat one-on-one in coverage than to sit back and let teams chunk it down the chunk 6, 7, 8 yards at a time, right? We've seen defense like that around here before. But yeah, big plays in man coverage. And it happened far less in 2024 than in 2023. But still, it's costly. So Illinois hit some big plays in the bowl. And the scheme does give, at times does give up that, with when mistakes are made. The big run at the end was inexcusable. When you need to stop to stay in the game. And they needed a big run to win it, and they won it. Mano a mano. Somebody got bounced out of a gap. Somebody got blocked, and boom, 60 yards later, the Illinois Fighting Illini are celebrating. And that happens. The Missouri comeback was a big deal too, as far as defense goes. I mean, you're up 21-6 at home at halftime against a team that this year had really struggled on the road. The crowd's going crazy. And the offense was to blame a little for that too. They kind of went into a shell. That's how comebacks usually happen. But man, you can't give up big plays and let teams back in the football game as much as maybe 2 years ago. Like I said, 2024, it wasn't egregious, but it was costly. And if the Gamecocks are going to take a next step, as we all know, everything matters, folks, because you're going to play some Alabama and LSU type of games. It's inevitable. Where you look back, and if you win, you go, my God, I'm glad that they didn't convert on that play where that guy was wide open and he dropped it. Or you're going to look back and go, man, the Gamecocks dropped a pass that was wide open. Or man, they couldn't get a stop on 4th and 1 that one time. It's a game of inches. And in this era, lots of close games. John Strickland and Jamie Bradford mentioned it the other day that because of NIL in the portal, all these teams are evenly matched. And the idiots that say the SEC is down because of a lack of a dominant team amaze me, because you look at basketball and conferences are rewarded in the narrative by their depth. I mean, everybody talks about the SEC being the best conference in basketball. It's not because of Auburn and Florida and Tennessee and Alabama. It has to do with them. It was because they're 13 deep. Football people, no. It's like, if you don't have a undefeated great team, you're in the conference isn't worth a crap. That's why if I were the I think SEC should have been upset last year, but the Big 12 should have been livid because there were 3 or 4 teams in that league better than SMU. Better. Including BYU that beat them. So, that's the thing there. Anywho, coffee with JC Shurburtt is sponsored again by GamecockCoffee.com, EncapsulateUSA.com. Also, Underdog Fantasy. Download that, help Garnet Trust. We'll be back. I'll be back later today on the morning show. Ashley Chastain Woodard, Gamecocks softball coach, and Mike Morgan are in with JB later today. Okay, folks, JC Shurburtt Coffee signing out. Holla at you soon.